Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hello? Anybody here? How many of you had lunch? That is a problem. That is a problem. Shall we all stand up for a second, please? 1 second. Just stand up for a quick second, please. Stand up and say hello to the person next to you for a second. Yes, get to know each other. Yes, talk to each other for a second. Eh? Sorry? Oh, okay, that's a good point, but it's above my pay grade. Get to know someone next to you. Come on. I see a Kenyan man here. Any Kenyans in the house? There's a Kenyan here. Any South Sudanese? South Sudanese? There's the governor of the South Sudan Bank. If you want to meet him, he's sitting right here. Anybody else from Uganda? Hello, Mujebareko. Mujebareko. Listen, we have very little time. We have to have a meaningful conversation. And I've read my brief. It basically says we are going to talk about money. It's very beautifully written, but in summary, we are going to talk about money. So now that Zanele is going to move her conversation somewhere else because I need to take over now. And we are all going to take our seats right now as I introduce my panel. By the way, my name is Alan Kasuja. I'm with the BBC. There's a very important podcast on the BBC called Africa Daily. That's what I present. Make sure you download it, subscribe, and tell your neighbors about it. Now, I just want to introduce my panel, if I may. Work with me, guys. Hello. Oh, the minister, you can't say anything about the minister. He's your host, so you just have to put up. Zanele's team is... Okay, let's just start immediately, if we may. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce my panel to you. I'd like to start with Adamasu Tadesse, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of TDB. Let's give him a round of applause as he comes down. Danladi Vaheyan. You would have thought that a Nigerian would have come up with a simpler name, but you know what? He got creative with it. Really good to see him. He's the co-founder and CEO of Verod Capital. Let's give him a round of applause as well. Please clap for them. Please clap for them. Okay, can we have one meeting? One meeting, please. Excusez-moi, monsieur, s'il vous plaît. Je ne comprends pas le français, but can we have one meeting, please? Thank you very much. And can also have Malik Ndiaye, who is the CEO Bank Agricole. Let's give him a round of applause. Olanguju Ashimolowo, Vice President Operations, ECOWAS, Bank for Investment and Development. Is he here? Oh, there he is coming. Let's give him a round of applause as well. Dr. Heike Hamgat, who is the Managing Director, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, ERDB. They here? No? No? And Wagner Albuquerque de Almeida, who is the Global Director for Manufacturing, Agribusiness and Services International Finance Corporation. Let's give him a round of applause. All the questions from the audience, and I'm going to create time for them, and all the comments are going to come from women for obvious reasons. Okay? So let's give my panel a round of applause. So the conversation we're supposed to have today is how can we mobilize all parties to address the gap in financing in agriculture? So there's a financial gap there and it needs to be addressed. I'm going to start with the man next to me. He seems to be the man with the real bank, with all the money. Just how big is your how big is your pocket at the moment?
Oh, Not far from $10 billion.
Not far from $10 billion. So that's how much he's sitting on. And tell me a little bit about where the financing opportunities are. First of all, have you been able to identify the gap? And if so, how do we address that gap?
Well, in short, the gap is quite significant, but I don't think we should pick on the agricultural sector. I think various sectors have been characterized by significant financing gaps. We've talked about infrastructure, industry, trade, and of course agriculture is one of them. It's part of the character of a growing region that's still developing. So in the area of agriculture, I must first of all say that we've had a very good run as TDB. It's actually been in the top 3 most financed sectors over the past almost 10 years. We finance inputs, we finance equipment, and we've actually found various financial institutions and corporates being quite active in the sector. And so we've managed to do quite a bit, to the point where actually we had to put a cap on it from a diversification perspective. I think it's a lot easier for a trade-orientated bank to do more because we do working capital, which obviously ties in very nicely with input financing and equipment financing and the like. And so it's been a very good story. But the gaps, of course, are there. I think we've heard the numbers in the past couple of days. And I think we just all need to do more as much as we can and find the right partners who can intermediate that finance.
Right, and is there a demand for the finance? Are you seeing an increased demand for it? And how easy is it for people to gain access to the money that you're sitting on? Because it's one thing for the money to be there and something else for people to have access to it, right?
Well, you know, our success has been in finding fit-for-purpose partners who can actually distribute the funding, because we tend to be...
Are those intermediaries, banks?
Yeah, intermediaries are banks, sometimes corporates, specialized funds, specialized MFIs. And so what we do is we find those aggregator-type counterparts who can then work with the many thousands of farmers on the ground and do it efficiently in a way that we can never do. And so that is why we've found quite a bit of success in doing the billions that we've been doing over the years. And financial institutions, commercial banks also do quite a bit on their own. They do that with corporates who are also aggregators. They do it with SMEs directly, and in some cases also smaller scale FIs who work with domestic commercial banks. We work very closely with commercial banks. Almost 20% of our portfolio is banks. So we lend to banks as a matter of regular course of business, and a lot of what we lend to banks also goes to working capital needs for various agricultural players. So for us, we've not really had a problem in finding demand. It's actually been managing that demand and making sure that we have a diversified portfolio.
And are farmers good business partners? Are they people that you can bank on? Are they reliable? I can understand, because I imagine that for a lot of farmers, it's an evolution for them because they are only just picking up the necessary skills to become more sophisticated. And if you looked around the continent, the level of sophistication isn't great. So the question then becomes, how do you make sure that they are actually good business partners?
Well, I think the simple answer is to chime in with what President Adesina said in the earlier panel, which is the actual risk profile, the risk statistics do suggest that it's not as risky as is often perceived. But of course, there is a lot of detail there that one has to be honest about. It depends which part of the cycle you're financing. So we tend to finance a particular part of the growing cycle, which is the tail end, and it's more
when all the risk has been
exactly. So and I think sometimes this is where we have to be honest. I think there's different types of financiers who are better fit to play a particular role at different stages of the cycle.
And if I come to you now, Danladi, you're the private equity guy, and at what stage do you get involved? How do you get involved, and how can private equity investments get involved into that space a bit more?
Thanks. Good evening, and great question. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So, like you just said, I'm one of the intermediaries, types of intermediary. I'm a private equity investor, but we invest across different asset classes. So I sit here not as an agriculture expert, but just as an investor, as a manager, investing on behalf of investors who want to get an attractive return for their capital, right? And this capital is agnostic, so my investors want to go where there's the highest chance of getting a return with minimal risk, while of course doing good.
Pause. What does that mean, what you just said?
They want to,
Where do they go specifically? What are they most attracted to?
they're most attracted to making a return on the investment.
Okay, give me an example of what you mean by
That could
that.
be agriculture, that could be infrastructure,
Okay.
it could be
Right.
manufacturing, it could be financial services,
Okay.
right?
And in the agriculture space, where specifically are they going at the moment?
So just before that, I think what point I wanted to emphasize that it's really important to think of agriculture as agribusiness.
Right,
And I know that's been
right.
emphasized over and over, but it is the only way to attract private equity capital because they're just thinking about it as a business. There are no handouts, there are no freebies. You are actually competing for this capital. Now, within agriculture, I mean, it's harder to answer your question specifically because, you know, if it's look across the value chain, there's so many different opportunities. I can tell you where we've made investments where we thought there've been attractive opportunities in the aquaculture space, where, you know, if you look at statistics, Africa imports $2 billion worth of fish across the continent.
$2 billion.
$2 billion of fish every year is imported, and it doesn't make too much sense, right? Nigeria alone imports, I think, close to 10,000 metric tons of one particular fish farmed in a rich fishing village in Norway, and this fish is eaten in Nigeria by the rich and the poor, right? We should be making
And why don't you do something in Nigeria about that?
So we did.
You did?
Yes.
So you're making a lot of money off it?
We're making some money. So we set up a local fish farm where we're processing fish, but it's an aquaculture facility. So we're growing fish indoors at about 10 times the density of fish grown outdoors. And also it's very sustainable because you're not depleting rivers, oceans, lakes of fish stock. So that's an example.
So you're quite responsive to market needs, eh? Because there was an obvious market for it, and you went for it.
Again, we're investing in businesses, right? Business needs to generate a return.
Okay.
Only generate a return if there's demand for your product.
And I think that's important because you are sort of answerable to your investors. They want to make sure that there is a return on the money they're giving you. And I then wonder, what sort of controls do you have in place in a country like Nigeria to make sure that, you know, the risk is managed?
It's a great question. I think there are risks in any business, right? And so one of the challenges in agriculture is the scale of the businesses available for intermediaries like myself and my industry, right? I know we talk about Africa's future being the smallholder farmer, but from a governance perspective, which you just brought up, it's really difficult to find governance at that level, right? Smallholder farmers, they're not the most efficient businesses. You know, limited bargaining power, less money to invest in infrastructure for more efficient farming, you know, less money, less funds to actually get products to the markets. There are all sorts of issues that they have, right? So what we need is more of the larger businesses that we can deploy capital into, and I think that will attract more private equity.
That's very interesting, and I want someone here to think about cooperatives and answer that question when the opportunity presents itself, because I wonder if that's part of the solution to the fact that, you know, farmers as individuals are not really viable entities to do business with. What about cooperatives? What about you, sir? What is your current experience?
Merci beaucoup, modérateur. Je voudrais me réjouir d'être présent cet après-midi pour discuter du gap du financement du secteur agricole. La Banque agricole du Sénégal que je dirige a une expérience de 34 ans, 35 ans maintenant, pour adresser spécifiquement les besoins de financement des filières agricoles du secteur primaire dans sa globalité, agriculture, production végétale, pêche et élevage. On l'a dit depuis hier, l'agriculture est un secteur risqué et c'est pour ça que justement il est important en tant qu'institution financière que nous parlions un peu de ces risques et comment nous travaillons pour justement adresser ces risques afin de fournir des ressources financières suffisantes à nos partenaires. Nous avons pu développer un vrai partenariat, un partenariat fort, j'allais dire, avec le public, avec le secteur public à l'État du Sénégal, mais aussi avec nos organisations de paysannes, nos partenaires dans les différentes filières. Nous sommes parvenus à faire en sorte de travailler sur une approche chaîne de valeur qui nous permet de faire en sorte que tous les acteurs de la chaîne de valeur puissent chacun jouer son rôle de façon à ce qu'on puisse obtenir au bout du chaîne véritablement une filière compétitive, une filière productive capable de générer des revenus et de nous permettre de créer des conditions de remboursement de la dette, puisque c'est ça aussi la question fondamentale. Très rapidement, nous avons pu, pendant ces 30 dernières années, développer des stratégies de recherche de ressources, parce qu'il faut des ressources aussi. Nous avons sur la place de Dakar des ressources à court terme suffisantes. Par contre, les ressources à long terme, il faut aller les chercher. Donc nous avons développé une stratégie de funding, de recherche de fonds auprès des bailleurs comme l'Agence française de développement et d'autres bailleurs comme la BADEA, comme aussi un certain nombre de bailleurs au niveau sous-régional, la BAD compris. Donc c'est important de trouver des ressources appropriées pour financer les investissements, puisque c'est des ressources longues dont on a besoin pour ce faire. Un autre élément qui est important aussi, c'est...
So just to be clear, where are these resources coming from? Just unpack that a little bit for us.
Ces ressources viennent justement des bailleurs de fonds multilatéraux ou bilatéraux, comme je l'ai dit tantôt. Nous travaillons avec l'IDA, donc les États-Unis d'Amérique. Nous travaillons avec l'Agence française de développement qui nous a mis une ligne de financement de 15 millions d'euros sur 15 ans, avec 5 ans de différé. Nous travaillons actuellement avec AFC pour obtenir une facilité senior, mais aussi accompagnée d'une ce qu'on appelle un risk sharing facility, donc un fonds de garantie pour accompagner la PME-PMI et la PME agricole en particulier, et aussi faire en sorte d'avoir de l'accompagnement pour renforcer les capacités de la banque, mais aussi de la capacité de nos partenaires. Nous avons aussi fait un exercice intéressant avec l'USAID Wati, basé à Accra. Nous avons pu cofinancer un projet de 5 millions de dollars pour justement mettre à la disposition de nos horticulteurs, de nos maraîchers, des kits de pompage pour 1 hectare, 2 hectares, 3 hectares, ce qui leur permet d'améliorer leur coût d'exploitation, mais aussi d'avoir une empreinte carbone capable d'aider à régler les questions climatiques. Et aujourd'hui, c'est quelque chose qui marche très fort. Et c'est nous qui avons bâti ce partenariat-là avec une entreprise sénégalaise qui fait toute la partie commande, livraison, service après-vente et entretien et maintenance.
Okay, because now, yeah, so you talk about long-term financing, the availability of the resources long-term. Everybody you talked about seems to be giving you aid or grants and things like that. How sustainable? What's the sustainability plan so that you're not going around with a basket in 20 years' time? How do you then make sure that whatever you're doing now is sustaining you way into the future?
Puisque nous considérons que l'agriculture est un business, comme on l'a dit tantôt, un business qui est rentable, même s'il y a encore des risques à adresser, nous nous mettons dans une perspective de long terme. Nous avons considéré que pendant très longtemps, les 20 premières années de la banque, nous avons travaillé pour accompagner le producteur dans sa parcelle. C'est l'aider à acheter des intrants, semences, engrais, produits phytosanitaires, matériel agricole. Arrive un moment où on se dit il faut aller au-delà et aider le producteur, aider la coopérative, aider l'union de producteurs, aider même l'investisseur privé qui veut installer une station de pompage pour irriguer 30 hectares avec des pivots modernes. Il faut que nous puissions lui donner des ressources. Et ces ressources-là ne sont pas des ressources d'un an, il faut du moyen long terme et c'est ce que nous sommes en train de faire. Nous sommes allés chercher des ressources chez nos partenaires qui sont avec nous depuis très très longtemps. L'AFD est actionnaire de la Banque agricole, mais aussi AFC et d'autres partenaires qui sont prêts à nous accompagner pour mettre des ressources de long terme, aider le secteur à faire de l'investissement, parce que c'est sur la question de l'investissement que la différence se fera.
Right. Yeah, you want to pick up on that.
I just want to add something on the cooperative that you mentioned.
Yeah, before you come to that, I'm also really interested in long-term sustainability because ultimately, if he who feeds you controls you, You can't go around asking for money way into the future. You need to be in a situation where you can actually feed yourself. This for me is the point I'm trying to make. Oh gosh, I might be rattling things here, but it's the truth of the matter. How do you make sure that a country, and I'm not talking about Senegal in particular, but countries across the continent are feeding their people without necessarily relying on outsiders who will come in, yes, but very often will come in with their own interests. Yeah, please,
Thanks.
just
Thanks
think about that as we proceed, yeah.
Thanks so much for that concern. I was going to share an experience with us earlier on. We had a program that we financed for a government in the sub-region in terms of cooperative. And it was to reach out to small and medium-term farmers and on a long-term basis. And to be honest, today the program has been very, very successful. In fact,
So how much money did you give them?
we gave them just 9 million euro.
9 million
Now,
euro.
I'll give you the details. Now, to also shock you, the rate of NPL coming from that project today is 0. Despite the fact that in agriculture, most bankers will say, oh, I'm sorry, it's a risky area. It depends on how you de-risk the project.
Okay, now you're going,
Now, one other thing before you go.
teach us how you did it.
Good. I'll just tell you a story. The Honorable Vice President of Namibia mentioned something earlier on that I need all of us to pay serious attention to. He said, you have situations whereby a farmer is going around with 1,000 cattle, and you think this guy is poor. Today, the average price of a head of cow goes from between $500 to $600. At 1,000, you are looking at a moving bank with $500,000 at a time. I don't know if anyone around this table is sitting with 500,000 here. I don't know.
He has 10 billion.
So what we've done is to make sure that we identify cooperative societies that can manage these fellows to properly channel their resources in a way that they will manage it in such a way that it will be attractive and bankable, and bankers like fellows around this table will be interested in supporting them.
Okay, so you're interested in supporting these people. At what point do you get involved? Are you going to teach them how the business is done? What do you do in order to prepare them and in order to make them attractive?
Good. In my bank, what we do is to...
Because let's just first of all understand what you did and why you got involved with a cooperative. It was because the individual farmer was not viable, right?
Sure.
Correct?
Yes.
So what did you do? How many farmers were you dealing with?
No, what was done was to finance the government that took the facility. The cooperative was set up as a standalone institution. They have the management, the board, everything, without any intervention.
So there is an issue of governance.
Yes. Well managed like any other business, and at the end of the day, they were able to recruit their professionals that contribute, guide the farmers on providing extension information on how to manage their products from production to the market. And you don't just have one product. We have tomatoes, you have fisheries, you have people rearing cattle, and so on, even vegetables. This is a well-managed business, and what we do is to make sure that all of the boxes for our risk profile are ticked by the time each farmer is benefiting. Today is a success story that we have in the country, and our plan in the bank is to deploy this across board for all the 15 countries in ECOWAS.
Interesting. Let's give my partner a round of applause. I'm learning a lot. Please clap for them. They're working really hard here. And I just want to bring Wagner in, and commercial banks, private sector actors, how do they get involved in trying to resolve this issue with the financial gap? I know part of it has been answered, but how do you mobilize finance from them?
First and foremost, we have our own resources as banks. And to finance agri-project, you also need to have a long-term approach to this subject. Now, when you are investing in financing agricultural products, you need to ensure that you have a long-term objective, and as such, you need to give facilities that are of low interest that will be attractive to each of these farm institutions, either SMEs or well-established farms. And when you do this also, there's a need for a good understanding by the banker of the seasonality of their product or whatever they harvest. For example, a farmer that grows maize, his seasonality is different from the fellow that cultivates cassava. So you need a good understanding on how the business works.
And Heike, do you want to pick up on that and how the private sector again and can be involved in a larger way with agribusiness?
Sure.
No, Heike, yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about this, and sorry about being slightly late. It was a bit. Thank you so much. I think, I mean, maybe let me take you all to think a bit about the private sector like a car. And so, a bit apologies. I'm German, so I like cars. But I think what you really need to look at how the private sector wants to get from A to B with a car. And I think what you need to look at is really how all the elements need to come together. So, for example, you need to have an airbag if things go wrong. So that's like risk insurance, a mitigant product, so that actually if something goes wrong, it could be a weather shock, could be something that helps, stops you accessing markets, there needs to be an airbag. But then you also need to
Who's going to take that risk?
So then, for example, that would be either an insurance company that would come in and take this risk, or it could be something that you structure in the financing. So for example, you have already repayments in line with regular, if you look at primary agriculture, with a harvesting season, so that you minimize these type of shocks. But if you think these shocks are massive, you can get an insurance product on top, or you can join together, have a first loss in cases of these extreme events. So I think you really want to offer a holistic package to the private sector so that they feel they can drive safely. So you want to also look at, okay, what kind of fuel? Okay, we're now talking, of course, all about e-mobility, but actually, what kind of fuel do you need? Do you need something short-term to move really fast? So you need working capital that just helps you through one season. Or do you need to really buy a lot of machineries, a lot of assets? So you need long-term financing products. And so it's really critical that you look at every investment in the agribusiness sector for the private sector individually and design something that works for them so that they can drive from A to B. Then we haven't spoken much about governments, but of course, you know, the rules of the road are important in order for the car not to get, you know, damaged and you move from A to B. So, for example, is it easy for you to buy your petrol on a credit card? So warehouse receipts, systems that enable you to, as a private sector, to maximize your investment in the right risk-sharing element, so that everyone takes the risk that they can, that they understand, that they can bear. So I think if you put all of these elements together, risk-sharing, the right kind of petrol, the right financing, short-term, long-term, or equity. We haven't spoken about equity, but equity might also be something you become a partner with the entrepreneur or agripreneur that, as President Adesina said this morning. And then you work together and design something as a package, and this way it really, I think, enables the private sector to take the risk that they can take.
Where has that worked? Do you have an example to help us understand it even better? Does anybody...
I can comment on that. A good example is what they have in Nigeria. Around 1978, the Central Bank of Nigeria, in conjunction with the government of Nigeria, put in a structure that is called the Agri-Credit Finance Scheme. So for every exposure by any bank, you are guaranteed 75% recovery.
5%, 75 of 5?
75% of your exposure, meaning that if there is crop failure on the part of any of your clients and so on, you have the assurance of the central bank that you have a coverage of up to 75%.
And listen, I'm not an expert in finance or anything. I'm just a curious journalist, so I ask these things as a journalist would. I've never heard of insurance for agriculture in Africa.
We have credit insurance today for agri-products, except for
Where is it working at the moment?
most of the credit insurance companies are a bit skeptical when it comes to financing the agri-business.
Yes, so that's why I'm
why
wondering, is there anybody, do you know anybody that is insuring in agribusiness?
Yes, of course.
In Africa?
Yeah,
Where? Who?
For example, there is Gary Fund. Gary Fund, they provide assurance on such things. And I mentioned to you also what the government has in place in Nigeria. If the private sector operations are not willing to come into this, the government can actually assist to put in this assurance system to encourage bankers, lenders.
So the government should be able to absorb, the government can't provide insurance.
No, but the central banks can. The central banks in the various...
That's interesting. That's really interesting. I've never, again, heard of that before, so you get to learn new things every day.
Just check online, Central Bank of Nigeria, AGCF, is there?
That's interesting. And now, Wagner...
There is also NISTA.
Yeah.
That's the National Integrated Risk-Sharing System for Agric Lending. It's a very robust program that the government in Nigeria has. These are some of the ways to encourage farmers to be in business.
Amazing the things that Nigeria is doing. We're running out of time, but I want Wagner to come in. Thank you for sitting so patiently. and listening in, you are interested in private sector and its involvement in situations like this again. What are your thoughts, having listened to what everybody else is saying? What are you going to say different?
Okay, I will start maybe provoking a little bit, okay? Not to you, because you already told me, okay? But the risks of the sector are lower than what we think. I think that is the key element for the sector is a lack of understanding of the risks. And the lack of the risk, the issues are not only with banks, but also with farmers, with cooperatives, everybody in the chain. I think it's a mistake only to talk about farmers alone. So you need to connect to the other parts of the value chain. It's also the same thing is wrong, is to talk only about the retailers, which are selling the food, because they also need to rely on the other part. I think everything is connected. When investors, they participate in different parts of the value chains, they benefit a lot from something, which is knowledge, understanding, transparency. They can predict a little bit more what can happen. Also, today is very convenient sometimes to people not to invest in the agribusiness, because what is the kind of returns? I think sometimes it's easier to buy a sovereign bond, which the risk is in principle for any country is close to zero, yes, and to invest in something that you don't know how to risk, that you cannot price the risk. I think there is a lot of misconception. There is a lot of understanding that we need to do, and particularly in Africa, because the farms are so small, they are not organized sometimes. So I think we need to help them a bit to organize, to create clusters, to create cooperatives, and to try to bring some kind of professionalization to these entities. We at IFC, we try to do that. For example,
okay, when you say professionalization, just how bad is the situation?
For example, sometimes we rely a lot on programs from governments that buy fertilizers. Sometimes they are not the right one to the soil for that particular property. So I think we need to have this kind of support from the governments. Yes, they are important. They are, particularly in the COVID, I think it was really essential. But we need to go a little bit deeper and to increase the key element of the equation which is missing, which is returns, the yields. If the people cannot make enough money, how can they borrow money? If the trading companies cannot believe that they can deliver, how they can give advances or help? So I think the whole chain needs to work together. There is no solution, only one single solution, a magic solution which will change the situation of the industry. So we need that, we need equity, we need insurance, we need de-risking tools, such as blended finance, for things which allow a little bit more risky to be done. You mentioned the question to my colleague here. Yes, they are receiving a grant. Yes, but that's part of the equation as well. There is a role for that, but cannot be only this kind of solutions for the future. When we look for the future, we also need to consider that things are changing very rapidly. And one thing that we are not coping so much today is climate risk. Climate risk is going to increase more and more as we move on. And the only thing that we know is that we need to produce 70% more food to the whole global to survive in 2050. So, yeah, interesting times.
Let's give my panel a round of applause. They've been absolutely brilliant. But I just want to end with final thoughts from Admasu. When you've listened to the panel and what do you see ahead of us? What does your crystal ball tell you about the future of agribusiness on the continent, about the financing of the, what are you seeing ahead of us?
My concluding remark on this is I think the prospects are quite optimistic, and I'm not just saying this off the cuff. I think we've heard in the past 24 or 48 hours some very, very big shifts that are happening in a number of countries. We've heard speakers allude to the huge numbers, the sea change that we're seeing. But of course, there's a lot of other things that need to happen to ensure that those successes are consolidated. The issue of post-harvest losses, I think in the big success stories we've heard, there has to be very quick follow-through to ensure that all this great production doesn't go to waste, because that's a huge problem that we've seen time and time again. But I think the bottom line really is what the last speaker alluded to. The magic is not in one or two parts of the solution. The magic is actually in the ecosystem that actually deals with the various components, because any one of those components can cause systemic failure. So this is where I think this forum has been fantastic. Just listening to the heads of state yesterday speaking to the issues, it just shows you how alive and informed the highest level of decision makers are on the diagnostics and the analytics around the sector. And several heads of state spoke not just about agriculture, they were very honest. They said, if you don't get the logistics right, if you don't get some of the infrastructure issues surrounding that right, you can get the farm side right, but everything else will actually conspire to make it fail. So in the final analysis, we're back to what development theorists have been saying for many years, which is it's not enough to get the prices right, it's not enough to get the institutions right, it's not enough to get the infrastructure right. Unfortunately, you have to get a lot right. And that's why you need leadership at the highest level to keep an eye on the ecosystem, to ensure that nobody drops the ball.
Ladies and gentlemen, my distinguished panel, Admasu Tadesse, President, Chief Executive of TDB, Danladi Van Heyen, who is the co-founder and CEO of Verot Capital, Malik Ndiaye, CEO of Bank Agricole, and also Dr. Olagunju Ashimolowo, who is the Vice President Operations, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development. And we've also had Mr. Wagner Albuquerque de Almeida, who is the Global Director for Manufacturing, Agribusiness, and Services of the International Finance Corporation, IFC, and Dr. Haik Hamgat, who is Managing Director, Southern Eastern Mediterranean European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. My name is Alan Kasuja, and it's been a pleasure hosting this session. Thank you very much.